Perhaps the most terrifying crime is that which is based on utterly unwarranted cruelty, especially when it involves children. According to these criteria, the case presented can be called one of the most repugnant and horrifying episodes in the history of world crimes. Louisa Kukumor was born and raised in the challenging conditions of Westanari, South Africa, where her life path was inextricably intertwined with the cruelty of those around her. In 1980, when Louisa was 10 years old, her father died, with whom she had a warm relationship despite his years of hard work. He always made time for his daughter. The sudden death of her father was a big blow to Louisa, after which her mother remarried. The new husband turned out to be a cruel man, subjecting the entire family to both moral and physical humiliation. The years of his tyranny left a deep mark on Louisa's soul, causing her to feel inadequate and desiring to make those around her feel worthless. Upon reaching adulthood, Louisa could not bear such treatment and sought by any means to leave her family. Eventually, she hastily married the first man she met, Freddie, who was 4 years her senior and, to her horror, turned out to be no better than her stepfather. Finding herself trapped in terror and constant fear because of her husband, Louisa, fortunately, found a reliable support in her mother, who helped her escape the burden of toxic relationships. After separating from Freddie, Louisa met mechanic Vander Merwe, whose peaceful and hardworking character, as well as his care, seemed to her ideal qualities for a life together. They began dating and soon got married, continuing to live in the same area of South Africa. Their first child was a boy named Johan, and 2 years later, on August 9, 2013, a daughter Poppy was born. A girl of extraordinary beauty, with blonde hair and clear blue eyes, whom everyone who saw her called a little doll and could not admire her enough. Unfortunately, Louisa's new union also ended in failure. After the children were born, her husband began to show aggression, which eventually led to physical violence. Realizing that the situation would not change for the better, Louisa decided it was time to draw a line and filed for divorce in 2014, just a year after their daughter's birth. According to Louisa's statements, Christo unleashed a torrent of insults and physical violence on her, similar to her previous partner, and just before the divorce, his actions escalated to threats of murder. His behavior became so extreme that Louisa, raising 2 children, was forced to obtain a court order restraining him from approaching her. After the official separation, Christo was limited to meeting with the children 3 times a month, provided a social services worker was present, and was also allowed weekly phone communication with the children, most of which was recorded. Despite adhering to all conditions and creating an appearance of decency, Louisa continued to insist on his true monstrous nature. In search of a peaceful life for herself and her children, the young mother decided to move, eventually ending up in the remote settlement of Orania, located 500 kilometers away, where just over 1,000 people lived. This small town, populated exclusively by whites, was renowned for its safety and became a home for descendants of Dutch, Germans, and French, where Louisa hoped to find solitude and peace for her family. The small family was warmly received by the community of Orania. Local residents and representatives of the Dutch Reformed Church offered support in adapting, helped settle in, find housing, and a job at a supermarket. They also assisted in finalizing the divorce process, in which Louisa was involved. She aimed to take Marissa, her ex-husband's daughter, from a previous union, who wished to live with her. In return, Marissa was willing to take on a significant part of the household duties and care for the younger children. With the support of the community, the young mother was able to take the teenager, who at 14 became a reliable helper, caring for the children and performing household tasks, including cooking and cleaning. Marissa became such an integral part of the family that the children sometimes referred to her as a mother. Her calmness and balance made Marissa more effective in raising the children compared to Louisa. All this happened against the backdrop of Louisa's intense work, which required her to invest maximum time and energy. In 2015, Cobus Camora became a new resident of Orania, where, thanks to community support, he managed to find a job at the local supermarket. It was there that he met a woman, a mother of 2 children who had been living in the settlement for a year. Similar to the story's main character, Cobus was followed by a complicated personal experience of several failed marriages and relationships, from each of which he had children. In fact, he had gone through divorce twice, each time committing to pay child support for his firstborn. But he hardly maintained any contact with the children and showed little interest in them. His relationships with his ex-spouses were extremely tense, and they in turn described him as merciless and cruel. Unfortunately, Louisa was not aware of the full extent of his past at the time of their acquaintance and was charmed by his friendly and kind demeanor, leading to a rapid development of their relationship. Shortly after the romance began, she accepted Kobus's proposal, and the couple decided to unite their destinies, organizing a wedding ceremony on November 14, 2015, and beginning their life together. Immediately after the marriage, Kobus made an unexpected decision to evict Marissa, sending her back to her father by bus, thereby depriving Johan and Poppy's children of a loving nanny and sister. This turn of events deeply traumatized the children, who had grown attached to Marissa as a stranger not interested in them appeared in their lives. As a result of such dramatic changes, the children became capricious and struggled with the separation from their sister. To great regret, Kobus quickly revealed himself to be not as they expected. Marissa's care provided the children with a sense of attention and time, becoming a close and dear person to them. Unlike her, Kobus showed irritability and reacted angrily to any of their tears. During this period, the children had to be sent to daycare, as the adults' occupations did not allow them to adequately care for the children at home. Educators noticed how Johan sought refuge in the bathroom upon the arrival of his mother and stepfather, indicating his reluctance to return home, a troubling sign for the staff. The daycare staff described Kobus as an extremely unpleasant and irritable person, showing coldness towards the children. A daycare worker's suspicions were raised several times. It seemed that when the parents brought him in, Johan was under the influence of some substances. His reactions appeared slowed, leading to speculation that he might have been given medication to sedate him, considering his high activity level, to make it easier to care for and supervise him. The parents apparently used sedatives on the child, but this assumption remained unconfirmed. When directly questioned by the teacher, they merely laughed. No further instances of such behavior were observed, however. Soon other troubling signs previously not taken seriously emerged. Educators noted that the boy was often dressed inappropriately for the season. Jackets and long-sleeve clothes in warm weather seemed out of place. It later turned out that this was done intentionally to hide bruises on his body. Attempts to undress Johan in daycare caused him to react aggressively and interfere with the educators, resulting in him staying in his outerwear all day. The boy's words did not leave the parents indifferent. They were clearly enraged by the thought that he might take off his warm clothes. The parents intimidated the boy to such an extent that the family's cruel treatment became clearly known to the daycare staff. After Louisa and Kobus began to inquire about the family's behavior, Johan was no longer brought to daycare. At the same time, Poppy continued to attend. Law enforcement decided not to involve the younger girl in daycare due to the inability to explain the situation at home. Despite communication difficulties, the child attempted to reveal the horrors of domestic violence. Poppy turned to the daycare workers with alarming stories and attempts to show the bruises on her body, but her speech was not understood. Over time, the daycare staff noticed bruises appearing in strange places on the child's body, emerging faster than they could heal. Louisa and Kobus were frequently questioned about the injuries. Nevertheless, the parents offered new explanations for the children's incidents each time. According to the mother and stepfather, Johan and Poppy were active. They ran and jumped a lot, which supposedly led to their bruises and scrapes during play or as a result of accidental falls. Since direct evidence of domestic violence could not be confirmed, the daycare workers had to take the presented stories at face value. Moreover, the mother often mentioned that the older brother was aggressive towards his younger sister. Louisa explained Johan's aggressive behavior as the reason for his absence from daycare, expressing concerns that he might harm other children and preferred not to bring him there until he became more manageable. This surprised the educators, as they never noticed any dangerous or aggressive behavior from the boy. On the contrary, he seemed withdrawn and avoided contact with others. Despite the convincing excuses from the parents, others suspected the presence of domestic violence in the family. A neighbor living next to the family noticed that the adults were rough with the children. He regularly heard the parents yell and insult the children for minor misdeeds. Although the neighbor did not witness physical violence, he was convinced of its presence, given the verbal punishments the children endured. One of the most troubling incidents the neighbor later recounted involved Poppy. According to his story, one day the stepfather suddenly started yelling loudly at the girl, apparently because she accidentally soiled the bed. Shortly after the harsh reprimands began, the girl screamed in such a way that it was clear this was not merely fear or upset. She was likely being hit. The next morning, the neighbor saw the girl with a cast on her leg. He particularly remembered the indifference of the parents when they returned with her from the hospital. Neither the mother nor the stepfather hurried to help her down from the backseat of the pickup, where she was transported in the cargo area as if she was an inanimate object. Moreover, the girl had to make her way out of the trunk herself, carrying a backpack that seemed considerably heavy. Instead of offering warm words of support, the stepfather merely hurried her along. The neighbor also noted that Poppy often woke up at night, breaking the silence with her cries. He speculated that the girl was having nightmares, but if the parents responded to her tears, it was only with shouts and reproaches, leading to her experiencing regular stress at night. After nighttime bouts of hysteria, the girl tried to cry as quietly as possible for about half an hour, trying not to be heard. But through the thin walls, the neighbor still caught her sobs. Eventually, she calmed down and fell asleep again by herself. After the incident with the broken leg, as soon as Poppy began to recover, another troubling incident of aggression occurred. The neighbor witnessed another argument in the house, which ended with a dull sound of impact, followed by the girl's loud crying, escalating into a tantrum. The next day, he noticed her walking by with a large bruise on her forehead, and it seemed her right arm was not functioning properly. Poppy kept it pressed to her torso. Unable to hold back, the man questioned the stepfather about the reasons for the girl's constant crying and her unhealing wounds. Kobus just smirked in response and became angry, providing no explanations and walking away. Instead, the girl's mother responded. Louisa claimed that the new injuries were the result of an accident from falling down the stairs while playing, adding that her daughter often found herself in such situations due to her carelessness. However, the neighbor did not believe her words. One incident that particularly outraged him occurred during the winter. In the cold weather, while Kobus was watering the garden, the children sat on the porch. Suddenly, the man began yelling at them, accusing them of some misdeeds. The neighbor found this unwarranted, as the brother and sister were simply sitting peacefully, doing nothing wrong. It seemed to him a strained pretext for an outburst of anger. Following this, Kobus stripped the children naked and doused them with cold water, forcing them to repeat an apology, which the neighbor could not make out. Being outside in the freezing cold until they were completely dry, the children experienced severe cold, sobbing and shivering from the chill, which could have led to serious illness. Faced with such actions, the neighbor could not remain indifferent and sought help from Child Protective Services. They were supposed to send a request for an investigation and compile a report for the local police station, then file a complaint with law enforcement. However, to his astonishment, no action followed from Child Protective Services. They seemed to ignore the information and appeals received. The neighbor had to repeatedly return to the workers of this service before they took the evidence of cruel treatment by the stepfather seriously. Additionally, because the town was so small, lacking a full-fledged police station, court, and other key institutions, the nearest police station was 40 kilometers away, and the neighbor had no means to get there himself. But he did not despair and continued to reach out to various local organizations, striving to ensure the children's safety. Fortunately, his efforts were successful. The guardianship and custodianship service workers finally paid attention to the situation, giving hope for an end to this horror for the children. In August 2016, a meeting was held with Louisa and Kobus, where the mother and stepfather were required to attend weekly pediatrician visits with the children. Additionally, they were prescribed a course of psychological counseling to address family issues. At first, it seemed that the spouses took these measures seriously. They visited the psychologist several times and went for medical examinations with the children twice in the first month. It appeared that the family was starting to improve. However, during this period, the neighbor continued to report the most severe cases of violence in the family. Returning to social services, he was told in response that the situation with the family was under control, but no improvements were happening. Despite his efforts, the neighbor found himself powerless to do more. His fears were confirmed when at the next examination, bruises were found on 3-year-old Poppy. Doctors tried to determine their origin, but due to the girl's age, her explanations were vague, though it was clear she was in pain. By procedure, the doctor was supposed to document any signs of injury, but in this case, the medic did not do so, later explaining that he could not get a clear explanation of the incident from the child and assumed the bruises were the result of domestic life, writing them off as accidental during play, a version supported by the mother. As a result of the lack of any action, one September morning in 2016, the neighbor discovered that Poppy's family had disappeared, having left overnight, likely to avoid attention. This secretive departure raised suspicions, while Kobus continued to attend his job, and the daycare staff where Poppy went were not informed about the move. The couple seemed to be seeking to evade responsibilities and avoid medical exams where they were nearly exposed. Choosing the path of disappearance, they moved to a new residence, heading to a farm owned by Louisa's mother, Galis, located several hours' drive from the town where the family had lived previously. This became a rare instance when Louisa and her mother gathered together with the children on the same property. Typically, Louisa tried to avoid letting the children have contact with their grandmother. Louisa's mother, despite her extensive experience living with an abuser, was shocked by the condition of her grandchildren. She immediately noticed numerous bruises covering the children's bodies, which was a shocking discovery for her. When the grandmother attempted to find out the origin of the numerous bruises from the boy, he pointed to Kobus as the cause of his injuries. Louisa, in turn, denied any accusations of domestic violence, calling Johann a liar. After visiting her daughter's home, the woman became deeply concerned about the situation within the family, but initially decided to seek advice from a pastor out of fear of causing harm. To her great disappointment, instead of the expected support, the spiritual mentor expressed displeasure, suggesting that the grandmother should not interfere in her daughter's private affairs since she was married and should solve her problems independently. After this conversation, Louisa's mother ceased seeking help and made no attempts to rescue the grandchildren. On October 25, 2016, a month after the family had been avoiding medical examinations, Louisa, in a panic, brought her daughter to the local hospital, claiming that the child suddenly fell ill and needed urgent help. Despite the medical team's resuscitation efforts, including artificial respiration, it was evident that the girl had been dead for some time, and no attempts could revive her. The doctors found Louisa's behavior suspicious. She seemed indifferent to the tragedy while expressing concerns about potential legal issues. The numerous injuries on the child's body, forming a single mass of bruises, drew particular attention. When asked about the origin of the bruises, Louisa answered that on the way to the hospital, due to road bumps, the child had severely bruised herself in the car's trunk, leading to the formation of the bruises. Louisa's deceit was almost immediately exposed. On Poppy's body, bruises at different stages of healing were discovered, indicating systematic violence. Fresh hematomas formed before previous ones had healed, and could not possibly be the result of accidental bruises from road bumps. The medic also noticed the family's second child, who had arrived with them. 5-year-old Johann looked very frightened, hiding in a corner and avoiding contact with the parents and other adults. The boy nervously muttered to himself and, when asked about his sister, said that Poppy no longer wanted to eat. His body also bore injury marks. All of this appeared highly suspicious and seemingly related to the tragedy that had befallen the 3-year-old girl. Therefore, the doctor decided to call the police. Louisa and Kobus tried to convince him not to do so, but the doctor ignored their pleas. When the first police officer arrived at the medical center, the doctor showed him a photograph of Poppy's body. The officer, being a father to a 1-year-old child himself, was so appalled by the extent of the girl's injuries that he was moved to tears. In his many years of service in law enforcement, the officer had never seen a body so mutilated, even among adults, let alone a toddler barely able to stand firmly on her feet. The stepfather was immediately taken to the police station, but Louisa was not detained, being considered a victim of domestic violence, just like the children. The true story of the 3-year-old child's death may never be fully revealed. It was partially reconstructed through witness testimonies, including the neighbor and the grandmother's accounts, the killer's words, and physical evidence. However, nearly all documents contained disputable points and contradictions. While Kobus was being taken and interrogated at the station, the officers decided to speak with Louisa. The woman recounted that shortly before the child's death, the child had hit her head on a cabinet. This happened on the eve of October 24th. After that, when the girl woke up the next day, her behavior seemed odd. She was almost lethargic, inactive, hardly spoke, and moved little. After the lunch break ended, Kobus returned from work, maintaining his usual depressive mood. This time, Louisa politely asked him to show restraint and not to be rough with the children, who were feeling unwell. However, this did not stop him. As a greeting, he kicked one of them in the stomach, as the mother of the deceased child recounted, claiming that such actions were routine for him. She did not wait for this violence to end and went shopping, talking about the incident with remarkable calmness. Upon Louisa's return, Kobus informed her of the girl's poor condition, saying that she had lost consciousness. The mother found her daughter in an empty bathtub and immediately noticed that the child's body was unusually cold and her lips were turning blue. They tried to revive the girl with artificial respiration, but unsuccessfully. Then they decided to take her to the hospital, placing her in the cargo bed of the pickup. This moment was one of the strangest in the story. Instead of carrying the 3-year-old girl in their arms, they placed her in the trunk like an inanimate object, where she helplessly bounced with every bump in the road. Such a mode of transportation unexpectedly explained the multitude of bruises on the deceased's body, making this detail a sad justification for the circumstances of their appearance. When the grandmother realized the tragedy that had befallen her granddaughter, she was deeply shocked, unable to believe that her own daughter could be involved. For her, as for many, the thought that such severe injuries could be the result of an accidental fall was unacceptable. Experts and medical professionals confirmed that the girl was systematically subjected to violence, possibly even thrown against walls and furniture. The autopsy report indicated significant blood accumulation in the lower left side of the skull, evidencing a serious injury capable of leading to a fatal outcome. Injuries and abrasions were found all over the body, predominantly on the face, chest, and thighs, creating the impression that they were caused by kicks, corroborated by the mother of the deceased's words. Other numerous injuries also indicated that the girl had been the object of deliberate and cruel violence, suffering from prolonged beatings. When this became known to the public, Kobus, being behind bars, faced aggression from other inmates who repeatedly attacked him and threatened to kill him. Meanwhile, Louisa, for unknown reasons, avoided law enforcement attention, despite her role in the incident. However, over time, information about her possible guilt in her daughter's fate spread among the town's residents, sparking a wave of outrage and a desire for retribution. The day before the farewell ceremony, on November 4th, 2016, Louisa encountered a visit from 2 women dressed in police uniforms. They convinced her to follow them to the station to give a statement. However, instead they took her outside the city, where they subjected her to a brutal beating. It turned out that these women were not affiliated with the police, but were ordinary citizens of the town who had decided to take justice into their own hands. As a result, Louisa arrived at her daughter Poppy's funeral, physically battered but alive, unlike her child. Poppy's biological father, Vander Merwe, was seen in tears during the farewell ceremony. He sat in the front row among friends and relatives, blaming his ex-wife, whom he considered an irresponsible mother. Louisa's face, showing signs of recent violence during the event, expressed not a hint of regret, displaying her indifference to her daughter's death. Louisa was taken into custody on December 15, 2016, facing charges similar to those against her husband. Despite the trial's active start, the process was postponed for a year and only began in October 2017. The main reason for the delay was the difficulty in finding a lawyer willing to defend the accused, as most attorneys were repulsed by the defendants and refused to take their case. Additionally, Kobus faced aggression from other inmates, leading him to attempt suicide twice, after which he spent a long time recovering in a medical facility. These circumstances contributed to the hearing's postponement, beneficially playing into the hands of the prosecution, providing additional time to gather testimony from Johan, the deceased brother. The boy confirmed that his stepfather regularly subjected him and his sister to physical violence, while his mother remained inactive, even covering for her husband and failing to help the children. According to Johan, the beatings were so severe that sometimes the loudness of the impacts exceeded their own cries of pain. His testimony became key in the case against his mother. Louisa attempted to defend herself, claiming she did everything possible to save her daughter, including dousing her with water and performing artificial respiration. However, Johan revealed that in reality, the girl was wet because after the beating, the stepfather dunked her head in the toilet, trying to revive her through flushing water, while their mother merely watched, making no attempt to stop Kobus. Ultimately, the court found both parents guilty of the girl's death and sentenced them to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In addition to the main sentence, each parent was sentenced to an additional 10 years in prison for endangering the life of the older child who narrowly escaped death, facing merciless treatment daily. The judge, in pronouncing the verdict, did not hide his outrage. Not only the brutality of the accused, but also their complete indifference to the consequences of their actions infuriated him. Among those present at the trial, there was a unanimous opinion that the defendants were indifferent to the girl's death, only concerned about their own punishment prospects. The case revealed a serious problem. Repeated pleas from neighbors to social services to check the family's conditions due to the brutal treatment of the children were ignored. None of these pleas led to the children's rescue. Later, social protection workers, who should have notified law enforcement, justified their inaction with logistical and bureaucratic difficulties, allegedly preventing them from responding promptly to the family situation. They faced no consequences for their lack of promptness.